This video will look at JavaScript and how we can create functions. So for the purposes of these tutorials, we can kind of consider functions and methods to be very similar. Functions will be something that we're creating. Methods are coming from another class, but for the purposes of these tutorials, you can kind of think of them interchangeably. So a quick review of what we've done using some properties and functions. We've created things like variables, say like a name, and we could hard code a name in here, a string, and then we could easily alert or store a name, or we could alert it, so we could say name.to uppercase. And this, again, if you haven't seen the videos prior to this, this is from the string methods video. This is going to take the name and it's going to make it all uppercase. This actually is not affecting name. This will take name, make it all uppercase, and print it out. But we're not using an assignment operator, so it won't actually store it anywhere. So you can see that now it's Kevin with all caps. I did add a couple buttons that we'll talk about in a second. Also for your array methods, you could say array, maybe nums equals, and then a square bracket would denote an array. If you wanted to put something in here, you could. And then you could also alert num dot maybe sort. And the difference between these array methods are going to be that this actually will affect the array. So if you sort it and you don't store it, it still will sort it. So now the array is in increasing order from 1 to 4. You'll notice here that we have parentheses, empty parentheses for to uppercase. We also have empty parentheses for sort. So that's how you know these things are functions or methods that performing an action. So in a second, when we write our own, we'll be able to denote those by using those empty parentheses. There are a couple that you could do where you have a parameter in there, which would be separated by commas. So something like car at, you're going to have to say a specific number. So car at position 1, which if you save this and refresh it, you will see that's the E. So JavaScript is a 0 indexed language, so make sure that you remember that you're starting at 1, or sorry, you're starting at 0, so 1 would be the second letter. And then the last letter would be the length of it, which is 5 minus 1, since we're starting at 0. So let's look at how we can write our own methods. I'm going to comment out these alerts so I don't have to see them every time. And then another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you real quick. We'll go into this more in depth later. But I've just created buttons, which are HTML tags, so we can create an event for this. And the one that I'm going to look at today is onClick. And this basically will run some JavaScript from your HTML. So it is camel case. So you can put some simple alert, some simple JavaScript in here. I'll do alert. And I'll say boop. So do not click. So if they do click, I'll scare them. So you'll notice that if you want to use quotes, you're going to have to use single quotes if you already have double quotes on the outside. You could do it the opposite way where you have single quotes on the outside and double quotes on the inside. So now if I refresh this and I say don't click, it'll say boo. And you can do it again and again without having to refresh it. So that's useful, but it's only one line of JavaScript. If you wanted to put 50 lines in here, it'd be really hard to read. So we can create something called a function. So for this second button, I'm going to say onClick equals, let's call it my func. And like we said earlier, if it's going to be a method or a function, you're going to need parentheses. So if you have no parameters, they'll be empty, or if you want to add parameters later, you can. So I can now create a function. So the way we created a variable is we said var, and then the thing following it would be the name of the variable. So likewise, a function would be function, and then whatever you wanted to call it. So this one would be my func. And this would have like a loop or an if statement. This would have a body. So anytime you said my func outside of this, it will, like right here on this button, it will jump to here and do whatever is inside of these braces. And you can put whatever you need to in there. So if I save this and refresh it, nothing's going to happen because I haven't actually called this function yet. If I click this second button, now it will jump up to my func and say hello. So two things that are happening is we are calling a function, and then that function is returning back to where it was called. So we'll talk about returns in a second, but when it reaches the end, if you don't have something called return, it will automatically just return. So this one does not have a return, but if you want to be more complete, you can just say the word return. So again, if it gets to the end of the function and you haven't returned yet, it will automatically return. So let's do another one that's got some parameters. So we'll do function and make it really simple. We'll just add. So we'll start making it super simple, and we'll just say whatever you call add, we will just return what is 2 plus 2. So we'll add those two numbers. This can be an alert, or this can be an event. Or if you wanted to, just outside of your functions, you could just call this. So you can just say add. When I call this, this will jump down to add. It will add 2 plus 2, and then it will return it back here. Like any other method I've used, if you don't do anything with it, it kind of just floats away into nowhere. So you have a couple options. You could save it as a variable. You can alert it. I'll save it as a variable. Let's just call it x. And now x will store 2 in this case. And if you want to alert that, you can just alert x. So now this will run the code. It will call that method because it's not in a function. So as soon as I refresh it, it will call it. It will jump down to add 2 plus 2, return back to here, stored in x, and then it will alert that. So it's pretty simple. Probably not going to want to just add two numbers, but what if you want to add two different numbers besides 2 and 2? So what we can do is we can say add some parameters. So maybe you want to do different numbers like 4 plus 6. So what we can do is we can add parameters, and like our other ones, we separate these by commas. But if you look down here, this doesn't take any parameters. So what you can do is add some parameters. And these can be whatever you want. This is just the name of a new variable, basically. So what happens when you say add 4 and 6, it says, well, set num1 equal to 4 and set num2 equal to 6. So now it will be num1 is 4 and this is 6, so that should return 10. So if I save this and refresh it, now it says 10. And the nice thing is, maybe you want to concatenate it to the end of hello. You could say add, and you could do two different numbers. So you could do 9, 3. And that will only happen when you call myfunc, which will only be called when you click that button. So when I refresh it, it will say 10 still, because that is happening outside of the functions. And then if I hit OK and click me, it'll say hello, and then it'll do 10. So now this has two parameters, and you are returning a value back to it. If you want to break it up a little more, you could always save this as like R for result or something along those lines. And you could do num1 plus num2. And then instead of doing the math in the return, you could just say return R. So it just may be a little easier to read if you do it this way. But you'll notice that if you refresh it, it still says 10, still says 12. So functions are really useful when you're doing events. So some user-driven thing that happens, whether it's clicking or hovering over or a time is reached or something along those lines. Also, it's nice to break things up. Or if you're going to do a chunk of code over and over again, it's nice just to be able to call that function. Also, if you wanted to change this a little bit and you wanted to subtract those numbers, or you wanted to square them or something different, and you use this code 50 times throughout your program, if you had copy and pasted it 50 times, you're going to have to update it 50 times. If you use the function, you would just have to go into your function and update that one time. It also makes it very easy to read for other people looking at your code. So function, to define it, you say the word function, all lowercase, and then you name it like you would a variable, and then the difference is you are going to have parentheses and then a body to it. So your properties like .length, they're basically variables, and then your methods that you have like .sort or char@, those are basically functions that are inside of another class.